Hello world and welcome to Why Wiki, alternately titled Everything You Always Wanted to Know About Wikis and Wikipedia but Were Afraid to Ask. My name is John Hubbard, I'm a librarian, and I'm going to be walking you through a guided tour of Wikipedia. I'm also going to discuss some of the pros and cons of the new publication format of wikis, and we're going to talk about just in general how different people are using Wikipedia to share knowledge and whether or not it should be trusted as a news source. Most of you viewing this have probably heard of Wikipedia. It's something of a media darling the past couple of years. It makes for very splashy headlines. Usually when something disastrous happens with the project, a high-profile error is discovered in it. I want to take you a little beyond the headlines and delve into just, first of all, the nuts and bolts of how the system works, how the site works, so you're aware of what types of information you're retrieving on it, as well as looking at some examples that are indicative of the inner workings of the site and both what the site has to offer the public. First off, a little brief history lesson here, little background information. In 1995, the Wiki software was invented. This is the software that drives Wikipedia. Any site that allows interactive content to be edited and developed is called a wiki. This picture here is of the infamous Wiki bus. Wiki means quick in Hawaiian. This bus runs at the Honolulu airport. And the gentleman who created the software in 1995, Ward Cunningham, used that name, and I think that's very indicative of what the software allows people to do is edit quickly. You don't have to know FTP, you don't have to mess up with folder and file rights, you don't even have to know HTML for the most part. You can just go in through your web browser and add content. In 2000, a traditional encyclopedia, and I don't mean traditional in a derogatory sense, just to say that's how it has always been done, and traditionally encyclopedias have been set up as a peer-reviewed system. And that launched in 2000 called Nupedia, and it consequently produced about a dozen articles, pretty much no content. The people in charge of that project, however, about a year or so later, decided to open up just a little bit, to say the least. Jimmy Wales and Larry Sanger, the co-founders of Wikipedia, launched an open content encyclopedia that is free to access and it also allows anyone with a web browser to go in and edit it. And the rest is kind of history. It continues to experience exponential growth since its launch. It's one of the most popular sites on the internet. A couple other interesting things about the Wikipedia site that differentiate it from some of the other popular sites. It is a non-profit endeavor. It has no advertisements currently and it's supported mostly by charitable donations. It's also not copyrighted in the traditional sense. It has an open publication license and is therefore widely disseminated throughout the internet. In terms of who's in charge of the project, this is a little sketch I put together, kind of a rough approximation of just who's involved with the project. Jimmy Wales is the founder that is still involved with the project. I'll talk about the founder that's not involved in the project later. And he envisages his role not as kind of a benevolent dictator, although there have been some legal situations where he has had to come in and exert his final authority. But he's been quoted as saying he wants to be more like the Queen of England, someone who's really just kind of a figurehead and not really running the shots in what has become a democratic system. To that vein, they've had an election of kind of oversight boards, and there's an arbitration committee set up. There are paid staff that run the dozens of servers that the website use. And for the most part, the types of people that run Wikipedia are just like you and me. They have a bunch of different types of accounts in Wikipedia. What that means is that you can go in, like most internet sites, and register an account name, which may or may not be your real name. And tied to that account is the edits that you make to the site, as well as your permission levels. The bureaucrats and administrators have an extra set of permissions to do things like ban other users, protect pages, and edit the main pages that are usually high vandalism targets. You can go in and edit Wikipedia without having to register too. You can go in without signing up or doing anything other than just loading it up on your screen. And in that case, the edits that you make are tracked just to the IP address that you happen to be on the computer at the time that you're connected. And this to me raises up a slew of issues that many people are quick to harp on, is that you can edit things anonymously. Even with those registered user accounts, it's sometimes just a handle. So just like this old New Yorker cartoon, nobody knows you're a dog at times. And there are situations where traditionally with editorial evaluation and evaluating just the background source of an information, people stress looking at the author, and you can't do that always in Wikipedia because there are anonymous edits. Some problems with that system is that it's not a straight-up democracy in that there's voting per se because of sock puppets. This is an example of a sock puppet here. What happens in Internet lingo, a sock puppet is a fake duplicate account that someone can create because you can go in and self-register on the Wikipedia site. You can go in and create a dozen accounts and pretend to essentially have a conversation with yourself. And those votes are usually kind of figured out, but also that's just one of the reasons that, because they don't have real names on the accounts, that they are not set up as a strict democracy. More about the anonymous editing. It also reminds me of what is very crudely represented here, what psychologists call the online disinhibition effect. People are more brazen the more distant you are with them when you're communicating with them. Anyone who's had an email flame war or something like that is aware of what's going on here. And that is no exception with the community of editors in Wikipedia. There are online discussions and debates that usually get quite messy and quite personal attacks with people, for the most part, just trying to make an annoyance of themselves. In terms of the rules of engagement of the site, there are 5 basic pillars and principles that are supposed to guide the rules of operation for what is in Wikipedia and how the volunteer editors contribute. It is an encyclopedia. That's kind of up for grabs at some point for deciding what content should be in the encyclopedia, but it's supposed to contain not original research, stuff presented in a neutral point of view. It's not going to be a soapbox or anything in theory. And it is free and open content. They have general rules of engagement, like I mentioned. But for the most part, the important one there is number 5. They do not have hard and fast rules for deciding things. And invariably, things are hammered out on a case-by-case basis of the editors that happen to stick around. It is the case really where it is the tyranny of the most persistent. The people that hang around and consistently edit things back into the articles how they want them to appear can win out over time from the people that go in and contribute quality stuff and then just leave the project. Let's go ahead and look at Wikipedia. I don't want to do just PowerPoint slides for the whole thing. I want to look at the actual site here. What this is something you should all recognize, a Google search result for sushi. This is one of the ways you can get at Wikipedia. As a popular site, it does invariably show up in the results listing for searches on most topics. So you can obviously get to it that way. The other way, I'm going to click on this definition link here, and that will load up a third-party site called answers.com, which has content syndicated from many free sources, including Wikipedia. So if I scroll down here, we can see what is hopefully a pretty recent version of the article about sushi that is culled from Wikipedia. In most cases, if you want to see what's in Wikipedia to make sure you get the most recent page, you should look at the Wikipedia site itself, though. Wikipedia.org is the main site. ian.wikipedia.org is the homepage for the English language version of the encyclopedia. It has a search box. That's usually how you can get to something that you're specifically looking for. Otherwise, you can just kind of browse the site. They have selected on the homepage what's called a featured article, kind of the article of the month, of the week, rather. Different pictures, news, and events that have been selected by the administrators and the community to be on the homepage, and links to their partner sites. You notice I cannot edit this page. Only administrators can edit the Wikipedia homepage. That's an example where they are not quite a free-for-all editing, and that there are some restrictions, and we'll talk about those later on just who can edit what, because I'm not signed in right now. Wikipedia has, in the English language version, currently over 1.4 million articles. That far blows away the content of any traditional encyclopedia, at least in terms of quantity. It's about 10 times larger than something like Britannica. And they have millions of user accounts, too, people that have gone in and contributed to the encyclopedia. Here's the typical user page, I'm sorry, not a user page, an article with biographical information about former Senator Joseph McCarthy. It reads pretty much like an encyclopedia article. It does have hyperlinks in it with the blue text, so if you click on one of them, that will lead you to other articles that you might be interested in. It's divided up in sections, has some illustrations and photographs. Again, for the most part, this is very analogous to what you will find in terms of layout and structure and content for the most part in a traditional encyclopedia. There's a heavy amount of notes and citations in this article as well. Wikipedia does not have experts in value credentials more than it does citations. So you are asked to not do original resource on the site and also cite your sources and references. And a growing number of articles are containing references and citations just like that. Most articles are also categorized. The categories are listed at the bottom of the page. You can click on the category name and that will load up, in this case, the other articles in Wikipedia that are categorized as United States Senators from Wisconsin. So I click on Russ Feingold and that will load up the article about him. And that's how they kind of classify and categorize articles. It is a many-to-many relationship. Articles can, of course, have multiple categories, and categories themselves are in kind of a nested hierarchical structure that can each have multiple parent categories. There's a couple add-ons that have been developed into the site. This is the article for Lambeau Field. You notice it has the coordinates link here. I can click on that and that will take me to a URL server that leads to things like Google Maps and other terror servers that have road information and satellite photos. I just wanted to mention that as one of the kind of neat things if you're looking at place information that you can follow out to see where exactly it is. Let's look at a few other example articles. This is an article for time, just as a concept. Pretty encyclopedic kind of picture there and treatment of this as a topic, how it's developed over history, different units of time. We see there different philosophical and scientific conceptions of time, and of course the references and related links and categories that we have there. Another article for equinox, just basic factual information you can look up in Wikipedia. You may or may not get the right information, but there are articles in Wikipedia. They're pretty much just like a basic reference work that you would find in a library containing information, in this case about the equinoxes, when it occurs, how it happens, and we see some pictures here talking and representing about that. Getting a little more advanced here, there is pretty stuff, well, that's over my head in Wikipedia. This is an article on wormholes, mathematical formulas here. Any type of topic that has kind of a, and we'll look at science fiction and stuff, kind of a geek adherency. So things like science fiction, kind of if someone's a history buff, those types of things are highly covered in Wikipedia. Another typical article here talking about Miss Keira Knightley, information about her career, the different movies and appearances that she's been in, as well as the categories that the article belongs to. Each article has different components. You can go in and look at the discussion page. That is the back-end conversations that take place within the editorial community, including you. You can add to any discussion talking about, in theory, not just the topic itself, but what should be in the article, what the picture should be in this case, information about her name, whether or not she's anorexic, and how that should be addressed in the article. That is always an important part of the article itself to read, because it's a transparent back end to see what has been going on with the article's development. There is also the straight up history tab that shows the development of the article over time, and you can track individual changes and edits that have happened since the article's inception. It is very useful to look at an article history to see if it's been a high vandalism target. In this case, we do have someone who's going in and reverting edits and backing out things that have been inserted into the article that probably aren't accurate, are just junk. And let me show you an example of how you can do that. Through each Wikipedia page, you can usually click Edit this page, or in an individual section that you're interested in, you can click the Edit button. That will load up not quite the HTML, it's more like a bulletin board format if you're familiar with that, at which point you can just type in or remove whatever you want to appear in the article. And at that point, it really is as simple as clicking Save Page. I'm not actually going to do that now, no sooner than I'd vandalize a library book, but I'll show you Show Preview to see this garbage text here would show up in this article if I were to click Save Page. And that is exactly what the next person to load up the article would see. Presumably, and probably not too long after I did that, however, that edit would probably be backed out and be removed and reverted by a well-intentioned kind of clean-up editor who goes in and fixes the article. I mentioned user accounts before. Each Wikipedia user that registers has their own user page. This is the user page for the Wikipedia founder, Jimbo Wales. Different information that he's put up on here about what languages he speaks, and different statements of principles, quotes about him, and just general contact information. You can kind of do what you want with your own user page, but like all other pages in Wikipedia, it is open to be edited by other people. This is the history for Jimbo Wales' user page, and this is a very interesting one to read through and just scroll through and see that it is vandalized quite regularly, but also it is reverted quite quickly. The last edit that took place on here was someone going in and just adding in the contents that were his page that was apparently wiped out. Other times there's things like profanities and just naughty kind of words and images inserted into the page of the Wikipedia founder. This was recently cleaned up within a minute of its last act of vandalism. A couple other random user pages just to show you here. This is an editing page of a pretty senior member in the editing community known simply as Gru. He does volunteer his real name, but in some cases a lot of the Wikipedia administrators and bureaucrats, you don't really know much about them. You don't know necessarily what they're volunteering as, what their name is. You can, of course, create a user page that is your real name. This is a user page for Danny E. It just has information about articles he's interested in and, of course, the languages he speaks. It's a big effort in Wikipedia to do things in different languages. This is a user page for librarian, Lori Litwin. There are a bunch of librarians like myself that do edit fairly regularly on the site, mostly with library science topics. And this is a user page for a user that's been kicked out of the project. This user wasn't causing problems in terms of vandalizing, but he was contributing original research to the project and not kind of citing his sources and playing nicely with others. He just kind of wanted to set up his own article. And once the editing community tried to kind of mold that behavior, he kind of self-destructed and started causing a lot of problems in Wikipedia, and so much so that his account and other fake accounts that he created to get into the project were banned. So that person cannot log in anymore. I mentioned the rules before. Just to review, it is an encyclopedia. It is not supposed to be an indiscriminate collection of information. It is supposed to have a neutral point of view. They're supposed to present even contentious issues in an objective manner. That is not always done, of course. If someone goes in and immediately inserts something that's their point of view, the editing community needs to work that out in terms of how that should be developed. And again, no firm rules, but they do have some policies they've developed over time to kind of help develop the encyclopedia, but also handle some of the problems that crop up. And this is probably the main one that gets violated most frequently. Do not disrupt Wikipedia to illustrate the point. In other words, if I wanted to argue that anyone can muck up Wikipedia, I do not do that by going in and adding junk text like I just showed you there. You need to work within the system, and if everyone did this, there'd be a lot less problems in the project. But this, again, this guideline does seem to be violated quite regularly. They're supposed to be nice to newcomers, just kind of don't bite the newbies, and kind of be polite in general. That's another thing that I see quite regularly violated on discussion pages with the contentious topics. Now, I don't want to say before that they don't have any hard and fast rules. The editing community has developed a pretty extensive style manual and things like this is the guide for naming conventions, very extensive coverage on how operas are titled, how ship names are titled, how different literary works are titled, people's names, if they include the honorifics or not. So there are rules that if you are going to be editing Wikipedia, it pays to read up on, so you make sure your efforts aren't wasted and people don't go in and just reverse out what you might have done against the standard rule set. This is an example of a search for ICT. This is a typical TLA, three-letter acronym. This is a disambiguation page. This is how Wikipedia maintains authority control. Because there are many things that stand for ICT, it links you to other articles such as the Wichita Airport, the Intercontinental Airport, that stand for ICT, and you can land on it that way. A few other examples for that. This is the article for Saturn, which is about the planet. But you see at the top here, there is a link to the disambiguation page that leads you to the other Saturn articles about the god and the car company and the rocket and so on. Another example, Michael Jordan, is of course the article about the basketball player, but I can click on Michael Jordan disambiguation and see that there's other things in there about Michael Jordan, a footballer. I presume that means what I would call a soccer player. Kind of an interesting note there. This is to show that there's some technical limitations with the Wiki software itself. This is the article for iTunes, and like iMac and iPod, the I in iTunes is not capitalized. The Wiki software automatically capitalizes, however, the first letter of each article. And this shows that it is definitely a very robust software system that drives the site, but there are occasionally a few kind of persistent quirks that you come across like that. This I have up on here is a discussion page, and what this is, I can just scroll through and show you, is the back end of an article going through a proposal that has points, counterpoints, 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 and just hundreds of different discussion points debating whether or not the articles for Darth Vader and Anakin Skywalker should be separate articles. And I think that's interesting to me, not just because it's an interesting discussion, but it really shows, like I said before, the fandom that is present in Wikipedia, the types of coverage that the volunteer editors are interested in adding into the encyclopedia makes the coverage on average a little more haphazard than something that is run by paid employees who have an editor telling them what to work on. Let me run you through a few quick examples that illustrate that. And these are kind of cherry-picked examples to show out some coverage problems, but they are indicative of some things that you can run across in Wikipedia. This is a very extensive article on a minor character in Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and this is a shorter article. Now, I don't want to mean, size is better. That definitely is not an argument that Encyclopedia Britannica would make. But the amount of coverage of something like the video game character G-Man being far and above the coverage for the head of the FBI is something that I think is of note. And this is an article for Roots, one of the most historical television miniseries of all times, and it has a couple paragraphs about it. And compare that to the 20-page or so article on the path to 9/11, the table of contents of which someone has very dutifully represented, extraordinary level of detail on the criticisms of the miniseries that was recently run by ABC Disney. This is probably an example of someone pushing a political point of view just based on the amount of coverage that they've put in talking about this particular movie. Most of the editing community in general, I'd say, is fairly left-leaning. But we also saw there some historical problems. Just kind of, it's becoming more of a current events encyclopedia. The article on the Foley scandal, it's not just that it was probably edited more than the article for most other scandals in the 70s and before, it's that it's probably looked at and used more often as well. Another example here, a 3-year run of a game show gets one paragraph, and the skit for Celebrity Jeopardy and Saturday Night Live gets a picture along with detailed information of each day that skit was broadcast. The article for Madagascar as a country is pretty quality. It contains information about the exports of the country, the economy, and the region, but it is about the same amount of coverage as the article for Madagascar, the film. Article on the military tactic for hit and run is about a screen or so long, and an article describing the gameplay tactics of a very old video game called StarCraft that goes into very extensive detail and has a little more loose vernacular than I would see in a typical encyclopedia article, and some of the articles in Wikipedia as well. It shows, again, kind of the volunteer coverage bias that you see. Now, to be fair, there is a very extensive military history section in Wikipedia that you can browse, including this featured article on trench warfare that goes into a great deal of depth and illustrations about the development of that combat tactic. There are curiosities in Wikipedia being so large that just kind of crop up in the encyclopedia. An article about the heavy metal umlaut for band names like Queensryche and Motorhead and Blue Oyster Cult to have umlauts in their names. There's an article devoted to a type of food from the television show Babylon 5, known as Spoo. There is about a couple hundred different articles about Battlestar Galactica. So the fandom is very well represented in Wikipedia, including a very extensive article on lightsabers and how they appear in the Star Wars galaxy, even with a spun-off sub-article on the 7 different styles of lightsaber combat. So very extensive coverage. If you're looking for stuff on Doctor Who or something, it's a great place to go. Glossary of sexual slurs. Wikipedia is not censored, so there's kind of some little more vulgar things that you can come across in there that are kind of presented to be a little more brazen there, including the list of the films that most frequently use a certain word. Kind of arbitrary information in here, but it has been selected and retained as an encyclopedia article. Now, in theory, Wikipedia is not an indiscriminate collection of information or just a random selection of things in a soapbox. And they do have policies that address that, but it's up to your point of view to see whether or not that's always the case. There have been some very major articles that have been extensively covered by the press as good sources of information. Right after any kind of major disaster happens, Hurricane Katrina is a good example of that. The Wikipedia article for that is very popular and very well developed by the editing community to be something that is very useful as a collection of information about what is going on, in this case with the cleanup efforts in New Orleans. This is the most popular page in Wikipedia in terms of how many times it's been edited. It's been edited over 30,000 times. This is the article for George Bush. It is currently locked. This what this little lock means to unregistered users. I'm not signed in right now, so there is no edit tab. I can just view the source of the page. That's because, as you may guess, this is a prime target for what is called vandalism, and we'll talk a little more about that with the next set of slides. But that's, if you want to see pretty much what the editing community can produce with 30,000 edits, this is a good article to read through and see kind of how neutral it is and how back and forth the criticisms and or kind of people who are fans of the president might have inserted stuff into the article. It's interesting to see, the page isn't loading right now, but how many articles have been revised the most amount of times. George Bush is up there, and there's just kind of a random spattering of things. Hurricane Katrina, Jesus, Islam, Britney Spears, they're all up there. A couple other interesting articles to note. This is the article for the Jordan Hill Railway Station. I think this is a very poignant article about what you can find in the encyclopedia. If you look through the article, which is just really about this small railway station in England, it has very extensive coverage about the service line and the station history and a gallery of photographs. And the reason for that, though, and you can see on the discussion page, is that this article was the 1 millionth article posted as a new article to the English language Wikipedia. And the editing community obviously rallied behind it, and everyone kind of got in, kind of developing it and making it a very good resource. But it's also telling to look one stop up and one stop down on the train line here and see what I was talking about before, kind of the haphazard coverage bias. You can see very short articles that show up in there. And we've reached the end of the alphabet. Alphabetically, this is the last article in the English Wikipedia. Pretty good discussion and analysis, but it is of a comic book character in Marvel Comics. So that's another thing to point out, just what you can find in Wikipedia. It's not always what I would call encyclopedic in the traditional sense that it shows up in traditional encyclopedias. So that's the basic picture of what Wikipedia is and how it operates. I want to delve a little deeper now into what's wrong with it, what's right with the model, and the metaphor with the iceberg here is, do the problems that we're going to be looking at constitute the tip of the iceberg? Is this project going to survive? Is it going to be sunk? Or is the editing community going to get on these problems? Or are these problems just going to kind of go away with more increased devotion, kind of testing if this project, or any project, you know, conceived as this open free-for-all, is going to survive? There are, believe it or not, debates within the Wikipedia editing community about what articles should contain, sometimes if an article should even exist or not. And it's usually kind of politically charged. People get in fights, people get kind of nasty, but there are, just because there's differences of opinions down to just the kind of the grammar about how things should be phrased. And fights do happen. We'll look at some examples of that. first of all, the most blatant case of what can go wrong with Wikipedia is what's called vandalism. That's where you can pretty obviously tell that someone in this case has gone something pretty goofy, and it's pretty easy to spot. Sometimes as a joke. I don't know what was going on here, inserting Hillary in the Hulk Hogan article. Kind of just done for attention. There's a lot of, again, psychological, sociological kind of breaching factors going on there, what people are kind of doing. Maybe they just don't like the project. Maybe they like that person who got kicked out, but they want to disrupt Wikipedia. Whether or not they want to make a point or not, I don't know. So this can and does happen. The Pope Palpatine article, for example, that was switched over from the Cardinal article right when he was elevated and became a very good resource of information, but it was also vandalized quite routinely of people inserting images from the Emperor in Star Wars into the Pope Palpatine article kind of as a joke. So we'll be looking at some examples of that and how it happens. Pulling it together, though, just in general, this first quote here is from Jimmy Wales. He's very level-headed, I think, in terms of kind of discouraging serious academic use of his creation. Now, he kind of weasels out of that and says, as with any encyclopedia, you want to use it as a starting point for research. But I think that is, for the most part, true. It can be a good starting point. You do need a little bit of faith and trusting it, but if you're doing serious stuff, you definitely need to go out and verify that. And I definitely like the quote here of calling it a quantum encyclopedia. That relates to quantum mechanics of, the closer you get to looking at something, the less you know more about it. And in theory, these articles are all being built up to be these perfect works with all of the editing community rallying behind them. But during that process and before they become stable, you have no way of knowing. I mean, you can look at the discussion page and the history page to see if it's been vandalized a lot in the past, but you really do have no way of knowing in the end if the article you're looking at has been vandalized or if it's just someone inserting misinformation intentionally or not. They might just not be informed and have the justified true belief of what they're typing in, that is, they're just unaware that it's not right. There was a major study a little over a year ago that tried to assess the overall accuracy of different encyclopedias, and it put Britannica head-to-head with Wikipedia. And the notable thing to most people wasn't just that they found a fair number of errors in Wikipedia, but that they found, at least within the same degree of freedom, the same number of errors in Britannica. And this, of course, riled up Britannica quite a bit. They're very proud of themselves about how many Nobel Prize winners, they have writing on their staff, and they refuse to acknowledge Wikipedia pretty much as existing. They still call themselves the world's largest encyclopedia. But this study itself was published in a peer-reviewed journal, and there were a few nitpicks with the methodology, but the study was not retracted, and the results kind of stand, just that there's problems with most everything that's out there. Let's browse through some of the back end of the problems here of Wikipedia. First of all, they do throw up disclaimers in your standard legalese to say, hey, we might be wrong, but also we have objectionable content. They have spoilers. They have the end of movies in them. And we saw pictures with the last set of slides there in Wikipedia. That holds true. Wikipedia is not PG. There are illustrations for basic anatomy, but also a wide variety of sexual behavior that is illustrated in Wikipedia. It's not pornographic, or not intended to be at least, but there is nudity and whatnot, as well as profanity in Wikipedia. We're going to tour some examples of articles now that are hot button issues and kind of contentious. This is an article for, if you don't recognize the name, the alleged victim in the Duke Lacrosse rape case. There was debate and continues to be, and at some point Jimmy Wales went in and deleted this article, debate regarding whether or not this person should really be named, which is, she's not being named by the media for the most part, but as a public name in court documents and whatnot, just kind of presenting factual information. That is something the encyclopedia does. It also dutifully reproduces the Muhammad cartoons that were quite controversial when they came out, were not picked out by the popular media, but just as an internet site of people kind of, like I said, they're very kind of open and freedom loving, so they put in the images about the cartoons in the pertinent article there. You can kind of guess what's controversial in Wikipedia. Just scroll through the list of issues here. Pretty much the types of stuff you stay away from in polite conversation: abortion, Bill O'Reilly, Osama bin Laden, Palestine, any type of political or religious or charged debate that there's two contentious issues on, there are editing disputes, sometimes edit wars, or what they call when someone goes in and edits something, someone else edits back, and they go back and forth, and at some point that needs to go to some level of arbitration to get that worked out. This is an interesting article to read. It's about a very left-leaning professor in Colorado who has made what some people have called treasonous comments about the administration and 9/11 in particular. It's very telling to look at the edit history of this page and the discussion to see people who are very much fans of him and people who are very much not. It's very interesting to read various political topics in Wikipedia and discover things like, well, I for one sure didn't know that Fidel Castro is not to be called a dictator. I still think of him as a dictator, but that is how the editing community has worked out to, in his article, he is not named as a dictator. So interesting things that you can find in there. Here's the rumor mill. Kenneth Lay article, when it was announced that he died, for a time said that he committed suicide. He did not commit suicide, and this article was eventually corrected, but it's almost a paradox that as something hits the fan and becomes recent news, it's where you want to go to Wikipedia to find information about that person, place, or thing, but that also makes it a high-profile target for, in this case, maybe not just vandals, but the rumor mill and the spreading of unverified information, obviously. I mentioned before, Wiki is becoming kind of the current events encyclopedia. This is an article for Mel Gibson, and it was eventually spun off to a completely separate article about his drunk driving arrest. And it's developed with many sections, the complete text of all his apologies and notes, and just really extensive coverage on something that is much broader in terms of its level of addressing of other topics, I would say, historical topics in Wikipedia of probably greater impact. The crocodile hunter after his death, again, just as an events happen, it's interesting to look at the Wikipedia article on it and see how instantly it develops, because really people jump on the bandwagon and want to document things who are fans of the project. But they do get enthusiastic. There were debates about whether or not he was, stabbed or impaled, and there's just kind of discussion on that and straight up vandalism, so this page was eventually locked there. Information about two ferries that crossed Lake Michigan became contentious, and those eventually had to be arbitrated by people who were fans of one ferry or the other. So it happens with kind of anything kind of business related at times, and just kind of you name it where debates can happen. This ties back to my naming convention thing before. This is an article for the University of Wisconsin that is about only one campus in the University of Wisconsin. What is known as the University of Wisconsin some places is just the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And it's interesting as a UW-Milwaukee employee to see where this article is placed and the discussion that goes on the back end talking about its naming. And you see this with other kind of naming disputes that crop up, and they're just differences of opinion about how things should be titled properly. They do have a Wikipedia project vandalism page talking about just what vandalism is and how they deal with it. There's a great deal of bots that crawl through the site and track the recent pages to see if, for example, a 10-page article was replaced with one sentence which contained profanity. Well, that's probably something that can be reverted back. You can track site-wide, and one of the great components, again, of Wikipedia is that history, the version control. You can track site-wide throughout Wikipedia the recent changes that take place just to see what's going on. Random articles is another good way to do that. It's just interesting to see. I'm going to click 500 here and see that it is 46 after the hour, and I scroll down to 43 after the hour. Within the last 3 minutes, that means there are 500 edits that happened in the English language Wikipedia. So again, it's a big project, lots of editors, a lot to keep on top of, obviously, and things do slip through the cracks invariably. And that's where Wikipedia becomes the punchline of people to make fun of it, like The Onion here telling that, not even misinformation that was in Wikipedia, but that's usually how it has become a punching bag of more traditionally inclined scholars and researchers and educators and many librarians to say that Wikipedia should just not be used because there's the possibility that it can go wrong. This article for John Siegenthaler was pretty much the reason why you see these locks now on some articles. This was an article for an administration official in the Kennedy administration, and it contained for several months a libelous information saying that he was involved with the Kennedy assassination. And he was browsing the web and found this information, became quite alarmed about it, and had some conversations with Jimmy Wales. It was reversed, but he also kind of went on the talk show circuit after that. There's even an article, kind of meta discussion in Wikipedia about it, talking about just kind of addressing the Wiki fanatics and saying, hey, wait a minute here, stuff can be wrong in here, and we need to a little more accountability possibly, but also just a little more realism with trusting what you can find in Wikipedia. Another example is a funny business going on here. Here's an article for Marty Meehan, Massachusetts member of the House of Representatives. And at some point, this article contained information stating a broken promise he made to not run for re-election. Well, that was erased and replaced with pretty lauding information about just what a great guy he was, pretty much. And you can kind of guess the end of that story. Some tracking of the IP address that did that edit found a lot of interesting kind of historical edits, and a bunch of kind of questionable things, inserting Scott McClellan's name, who was Bush's press secretary at the time, into the article for douche. And lo and behold, you can track IP addresses, and in this case, it tracks to the U.S. House of Representatives. Now, it was, of course, supposedly a low-level staffer acting on their own and whatnot that did that edit, but it was kind of interesting, and we're going to see a lot more political involvement, I think, with future races being edited in Wikipedia. Another egg on their face moment. There are rival early podcasters that both claim kind of credit for inventing it, and at one point one of them went in and removed information on his colleague from this article, and he claimed that he didn't really know how to use the system, but that's pretty much what he did there for the history of podcasting. This is the article for the soccer, or should I say football player, who had that famous headbutt in the World Cup. And this is just an interesting article because it was extensively edited right after the incident and continues to be kind of tweaked about what went on with that situation. You wouldn't think that an article for Elephant would be very contentious and vandalized, but the reason this is currently locked is that someone at some point went in and said, I'm going to play a joke and change the number of elephants that exist in the world to, triple of what it says. Now, that's no big deal. A simple act of vandalism like that is usually corrected. The problem was he did it on air, and this was done by Stephen Colbert of the Colbert Report, and he's had some very tongue-in-cheek comments about Wikipedia and its reliance on what he calls the concept of truthiness, kind of very interesting philosophy of science debate there, but just pretty much usually poking fun at the administration, saying you just need to say it enough times and it becomes true, and just kind of making fun of Wikipedia's coverage and its potential, at least in this case, the elephant article by Colbert fans was edited and vandalized quite regularly, so it was eventually locked. Other problems. This is an article for George Porter. It is an older version that's since been fixed, but at this version it contained text that was lifted from his official biography page. It was plagiarized, and that's a no-no, and that's something very much frowned upon. The article for Digital Reference was plagiarized from an article someone wrote defining digital reference themselves. It was plagiarized into Wikipedia. It was since fixed, but it was kind of interesting to see that maybe a librarian or a library student plagiarized contents there. Now, alternatively, it's interesting not just that Wikipedia polling sources and how they're supposed to cite them, but that Wikipedia itself is being used and cited by the media as a source for information, as supporting of their articles that they're writing about. There have continued to be several cases of journalists getting busted for plagiarizing Wikipedia articles. And it's very worrisome to some people to see Wikipedia being cited by, say judges in court decisions. But it is being done. But people do make mistakes. Someone was making a foreign language DVD menu, and they got the wrong word out of Wikipedia, and that's what shows up in the DVD now because of that. Another project page, there's a lot of kind of, Wikipedia is as much as a community as it is an encyclopedia. So it's interesting to see like the discussion pages, just the different back end and the discussion that goes on here. And what this is someone placing a bounty on different articles that they want to be written up. I mentioned before, Wikipedia is very much driven by charitable donations, and many by major internet companies, but this is just individuals offering money for articles to be kind of beefed up and pulled up to what they call that featured article kind of status. And they're offering donations to the Wikimedia Foundation for that. So very interesting there. Okay, just a few brief kind of tables and charts to show you kind of my Ross Perot section here. Just keep in mind it's kind of a little more muddled than what I'm going to show you as with this graph here. First of all, though, I mentioned the growth. It really is growing, and people keep thinking it's going to level off. Eventually, of course, we'll have to once all topics have been kind of addressed and developed, but there'll still be current events, and there still might just be a constant stream of new internet users getting into the project. Wikipedia as a whole contains over 1 billion words, over 4 million articles, in over 200 languages. It is 10 times larger than Britannica, and it does continue to grow. In terms of who uses it, a lot of people use it. It's being highly adopted. It's definitely past the curve, this kind of shrinking curve of who adopts a product after it hits the market and after the kind of diffusion of the innovation. You might be familiar with this trend. If you bought a $2,000 DVD player ever, you're on the front of this curve. If you don't have one yet, you're more towards the late majority or the laggards, I'd say there. It's definitely over the hump. Wikipedia is used by the majority of, well, maybe not the majority, but it's used by a lot of internet users out there, and it's over the hump in terms of popularity. So it's just kind of an interesting curve there. And it's innovative, but innovation is risky. It's just one of my favorite Dilbert comics here, just to mention as an aside. This is where he buys the first video phone ever, and he has to wait around for someone else to buy another one to use it. Wikipedia is well past this, but it's just kind of interesting to keep in mind of being on the cutting edge, and sometimes the bleeding edge. The new systems don't always work out right, and sometimes things are just fads and they get past the buzz and they just kind of go away. A lot of people still think that with wikis and Wikipedia, that they really won't last. This is an interesting, another chart here talking about kind of what's called the arc of enthusiasm and the general hype cycle of what the Gartner Group calls of after something is invented and it gets to the market, and until it gets to widespread use, it goes through this arc here of what's called a peak, kind of the hype when it becomes a buzzword. And wikis and the whole Web 0.0 movement and things like that have definitely become something of a buzzword, and I'm not sure if it's probably over the hump in terms of that. This is a little older graph, but I don't know if it's going to drop off the hump at this point and become a successful project, or if it's going to level off and be a productive medium. Google Trends, the popularity of keywords entered into the search index, Wikipedia does continue to rise, especially compared to the flat lines there that we see for other encyclopedias and dictionaries. Also interesting, this is definitely not an either-or thing. It's a false dichotomy, but to look at how library, the blue line there, is kind of level, and Wikipedia is fast on its heels there. It also reminds me of the basic conventional wisdom of just that the harder something is to do, the better it is. The harder a school to get into is, the better that school is. The lower acceptance rate a peer-reviewed journal has, supposedly, and this is a big thing with tenure review, the better it is to get into that journal to be published. That is the kind of traditional mark. That's not always true. If you work harder, work smarter rather, not harder. And this might be a new view that kind of the open access movement, the open source movement have been getting into. That just first of all, maybe even the bigger something is, but also how open it is, how free it is, whether or not it's restricted. That boosts definitely its ease of use. It's much more useful and easy to use Google than it is to use a library website. There's no arguing that. But does that appeal really mean that it's a better thing? I don't know. It's a complicated issue, probably better represented by this graph here. I want to delve a little deeper into these problems of Wikipedia and try to put them in perspective with other publication formats and talk about, just in general, what I mentioned before, the faith in Wikipedia as a disruptive technology, as a disruptive method, compared to the traditional ways of distributing information, and what that means, what both users of the site and educators in general should know about how it works and how it compares to other things out there. Now, first of all, librarians and teachers who criticize Wikipedia, you're not alone. A recent poll in LIS News ran about 50-50 in terms of whether or not a librarian would refer a patron to Wikipedia to answer a question. And I like the quote here, especially at the bottom, about equating using either an anonymous work or Wikipedia with having a stranger take out your tonsils. So there's definitely some people that really hate Wikipedia just as a basic principle and think it's really the demise of serious scholarship and letting people evaluate information. A lot of people point to the Wikipedia disclaimers as evidence that they can be wrong, because they do admit that. They have the standard legal and medical disclaimers, as well as saying that we might be wrong. Now, the problem with that is that boilerplate is duplicated by reputable or more reputable sites. You know, other encyclopedias, other dictionaries, other news sites say that as well. So there's possibly that and other things. We'll look at that in a little bit. I also want to point out 2 example quotes about the issue of homosexuality. A lot of people say that Wikipedia is just a soapbox and it's just people espousing certain points of view. Well, that happens in other places as well. These 2 quotes, one is pretty much calling homosexuality a disease, and the other's a little level, are taken from, the first one is from a book in my library on our hallowed stacks, and the second one is from the relevant Wikipedia article. And which one would you rather use? Which one do you think is more reliable or just kind of trustworthy? Here's a motley crew here. Let's just kind of take you through these people just to show you why I'm illustrating them. The gentleman in the top right there is James Frey, as he appeared on Oprah explaining why his biography was fabricated. Bottom right is Vladimir Putin, who allegedly plagiarized large sections of his doctoral dissertation, as did the young woman on the top right, a Ivy League student, Kavaya, who her first novel was very popular, but it was also heavily plagiarized from other popular novels, and the publishers did not check that. Bottom right is a doctor who had Dr. Huang Woo-suk, who had some peer-reviewed publications on cloning that turned out to be research fraud. Bottom center, Jason Blair fabricated large sections of his items when he was a journalist at the New York Times. And top center is my favorite, Dr. Alan Sokol, a physicist who, like many natural scientists, has some degree of disdain for the social sciences, and he submitted a article to a reviewed publication in sociology that, if you can't really understand what this says, he meant it to be that way. It's a bunch of nonsensical phrases, including claims. This was done kind of during one of the deconstructionist swings, claiming, you know, that such lofty concepts of math and gravity, you know, did not exist. And that was done kind of to poke fun at the vernacular of a particular discipline, but there have been also cases of kind of randomly generated papers accepted to computer science conference. There was a book written intentionally to be the worst novel ever that was accepted for publication by a press that was presenting itself not as a vanity press. And just in general, what I'm trying to point out here, this is a hoax that was picked up by the BBC News and is still, you know, over 4 years later on their website about blondes dying out, is that, and the quote is from the James Frey fallout scandal, is that publishers don't always get their facts right either. That there is misinformation out there, as with, you know, the old Dewey defeats Truman. The press can get things wrong. It's not just Wikipedia that can sometimes be inaccurate. Interesting thing there, this is a Photoshop version from The Onion, that satirical newspaper, is quite regularly, there's been over a dozen examples, picked up as factual news reporting by other national and sometimes international news outlets. So there have been some famous cases of that, just kind of people thinking that, you know, I read it, so it must be true. More recent example of trying to be first to market here, you know, maybe get the scoop. The New York Post had just a little oopsie here during the presidential race of '04 of who Kerry picked for his vice presidential running mate. A lot of other examples of things kind of shaping the content of the books that we have available, these traditional publication methods. And many educators are much more aware than me of the forces at work trying to influence how library information is presented. These are stickers that were placed on scientific textbooks in Georgia for a while that discussed evolution. The fundamental unifying theory of biological science was kind of ragged on to be just a theory, you know, just like gravity and other theories. But there was an alternative sticker that someone proposed to kind of put that in perspective, because, you know, evolution really is to be taken more factually compared to something that's unfalsifiable and unparsimonious and an argument from ignorance. But I won't get into that too much. But there are things that libraries have that are quackery. You know, if it's just kind of pseudoscience like this, the reflexology of, you know, areas of your feet corresponding to your organs, just kind of junk science like that. That stuff, like, you know, the ball lightning and the ESP is treated more even-handedly and more scientifically in Wikipedia than it is in texts like these that you can find in a library. So what can you trust? Traditional information literacy kind of criterion methods for evaluating information. You'll look at the source. There was an early method in the 90s that was espoused to just look at the domain name. And if it says .gov, that means if it's a government site, like, say, gop.gov, and is therefore trustworthy. Well, as everyone knows, the government quite routinely, you know, kind of black ops propaganda, but also information about, you know, the Bush administration put out fudge stuff about a purported link between abortion and breast cancer. There's been stuff submitted to the congressional record detailing conversations that never happened. You know, there's a lot of, you're naive, of course, if you think that, you know, governments don't put out misinformation as much as other people. You know, no new taxes, I'm not a crook, significant quantities of uranium, and of course those are small potatoes compared to the last one there, that impeachable offense, that the government can lie. Another one, the .edu. Here's a site from northwestern.edu, and I examine that title there closely. This is a Holocaust denier. This is someone espousing his point of view that the Holocaust did not happen on, at a time, a university webpage. Holocaust denial is very interesting because it really pushes the bounds of what information and points of view should people be allowed to publish. It's illegal to publish that information in many countries in Europe. Anyway, all this nitpicking taken as a whole, I just wanted to point out that if you're going to cast stones at Wikipedia, you can nitpick these traditional publication methods just as easily. And a better method might be, like Agent Scully here, to kind of trust but verify anything you find. And it's very dangerous for educators to tell people something like, don't use Wikipedia, and to make it their forbidden fruit, and to say, this other bunch of stuff you can trust. You can turn your kind of critical thinking skills off when you look at something like that. You need to be a little more holistic and realize that there's a lot of information out there, and any source can be wrong. On a whole, of course, yes, peer-reviewed journals are more reliable and more authoritative, and of course better quality in-depth research than you might find in Wikipedia. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Wikipedia, as used, you know, as a quick and dirty, you know, something that you do need to validate, lookup should be used. And people use it, whether, you know, people who hate it want them to or not. It's kind of the whole give them what they want argument with librarians sitting back and saying, don't use this, come to us. We need to meet them a little more on the playing field, I think, and acknowledge these new publication formats and address their strengths and their weaknesses in comparison to these other types of things that are out there. You know, get them while they're young. There's kids out there that use Wikipedia, that use the general web for their homework, for their research, a lot more than they use a library. And as this cartoon shows, a lot of times library users are not in the library building itself. These, of course, are very old arguments. They go back far beyond the debate of whether or not Wikipedia should be trusted or not. It is a basic issue of faith, but they relate to me to many other arguments and issues that have gone throughout history with the distribution of information. In the mid-90s, libraries really struggled with whether or not to include the internet in their library building, to accept the internet as a whole, as the web as a whole, as part of their collections that they're kind of putting their approval on. These issues go back beyond, 100 years ago, when libraries decided to open up their stacks, open up their shelves, and not be this antiquated, literally gatekeeper that you had to go through to get access to information. And they also these issues go back beyond arguments of whether or not someone without a PhD should be allowed to publish, or someone who's a member of a certain sect or something should be allowed to have a say in matters. It's kind of best stated in an argument a long time ago. Let me show you this.
Your overconfidence is your weakness.
Your faith in your friends is yours.
Now, keeping in mind who won that argument, I think the analogy here, somewhat loosely, is that the emperor is overconfident with his tried and true methods for relying on information, whereas young Luke has faith in other people to go forth and contribute to this encyclopedia, to, in the end, produce something that is on the same quality and caliber and trustworthiness as other types of information sources. And it's just one more tool in your repertoire as a researcher that can be used, and if used wisely. Before we look at some other wiki sites, I want to challenge everyone listening to go in and edit Wikipedia and try it out. Not to disrupt it, of course, but just see what you know that Wikipedia doesn't, and what you can contribute to and freely share your knowledge about. There's got to be something that you wrote a paper on, or just information about the hometown you grew up in that you know about, that it would be better off if you didn't take it with you. That's really what the project is about, sharing knowledge. It takes some guts to do that, to go in and contribute stuff that may be altered by other people, but it's better than, like I said, just the take it with you mentality that is prevalent kind of with the publishing these days that I see. There are other sites, libraries, wikis I'm going to focus on, but look at some other wiki sites as well that use the wiki software. They look a little like Wikipedia. Some are officially affiliated with them, some are just fan sites. And what these are, things we're going to look at, is stuff that uses the same open editing system. It allows everyone to go in, or select people to go in and modify and edit the site. Any site that operates more or less like Wikipedia is called, just the more generic word, the wiki. And that's some examples of those. Let's go ahead and look at them. First of all, this is the Wikimedia Foundation. This is the charitable umbrella that manages Wikipedia as well as its sister projects. And this lists all of the affiliated, official, what I called before, sister sites of Wikipedia. First of all, there's Wikipedia in other languages. It's not automatically translated. It's essentially separate projects that they have crosslinks in, but are maintained by different editorial communities. The English language one is the largest, followed by the German language one, and they've done some interesting things there with models that we might be seeing in the English language one pertaining to version control. Also of note, the Chinese language Wikipedia cannot be accessed by normal means within the country of China. They censor a great deal of the internet there, and unlike the commercial content providers like Yahoo and Google that have kind of sold out to China and offered censored versions of their articles, Wikipedia refuses to do that. They say that we will not be censored, and we will not condone having something that's free and open and obviously has articles in it about the Tiananmen Square massacre and Falun Gong in Tibet that the Chinese government does not want people to see. There's other related projects that start off with the word wiki. There's a dictionary version of Wikipedia set up to just define words. There's original source material, quotes that have been put in, and Wiki News, we see that spilling over a lot with the examples I showed you to Wikipedia proper and some other related projects. This is an entry for dodecahedron in the Wiki dictionary, just pretty basic definition of the term. And here's an example of the Wikipedia article. And this to me points out that the older notions of a separate encyclopedia and a separate dictionary maybe aren't necessary in this case. Maybe they could be more merged, because you can do a search in one of them and get no hits, and there could be a record in the other one in that case. So there's a good deal of overlap in the dictionary and in the encyclopedia there. This is the quotes method here, the wiki quote. I show Mark Twain because a lot of people invariably attribute quotes that they can't find the source to him, but this is a documented record of quotations that have been referenced that he made. Keeping in mind, again, the fan base in these wiki projects, there's a very extensive site about quotes from The Simpsons that is in WikiQuote, as well as a neat collection of famous and not so famous last words that people and fictional characters have made. This is an article for Porthos, one of the Three Musketeers. It's, about a page or so long. It goes about the characters' appearances and development. And here's a longer page for Porthos the dog. If you don't recognize him, he's Captain Archer's dog in Star Trek Enterprise. And it's pretty extensive discussion of the episodes he appeared in and background of his character. And what I'm going to show you now is even a longer page from the Star Trek Wiki. This is very, very extensive discussion about the dog as a character here and where he's appeared. Memory Alpha is not an affiliated site with Wikipedia, but you can see they've tricked it out a little bit to have different color scheme, but it does look a lot like Wikipedia. That's because it uses the same underlying software. And this has been one of the most successful third-party wikis that have been set up. They have over 20,000 articles, and this really is a good example of how you can not have redundancy of 100,000 different Star Trek fan sites, but they all kind of work on this main fan site and have developed it up to be a very useful resource. As everyone knows, Star Trek fans are a little crazy with some of their fandom. So what's called derisively sometimes fan cropped that crops up in Wikipedia, I would like to see spun off into more wikis like this, like the wiki for Buffy or the wiki for the Muppets, or in this case the wiki for Star Trek. There's another couple for Star Wars as well. This is something called the Flu Wiki, set up to provide a clearinghouse of information about the avian bird flu. It's interesting for me because getting medical information on a wiki is definitely pushing the envelope of where I would look for reliable information. But it has become, this was set up far before the government had their pandemic site set up. It's become a popular site for some people to go in and look for information about the bird flu. This is a political wiki. We mentioned politics before. I think we're going to be seeing, just like Howard Dean revolutionized the use of blogs in the 2004 election, in the 2008 race, they're going to be maybe not a wiki for each candidate, but more and more things set up, like this one, to pretty much just criticize the president. Wikis being set up as grassroots movements to get everyone involved in a particular campaign. This is a wiki set up to have information about so-called creationist science, presumably because the contents in this wiki are not as welcome in the more kind of objective, neutral point of view domain of Wikipedia. And this is an interesting project here. It's just announced. It's still pretty much vapor, but this was announced by the co-founder of Wikipedia that I mentioned before, Larry Sanger, who has left the project a couple years ago and has kind of criticized it from the sidelines as being anti-expert and not really having accountability with anonymous editors. And he has proposed a fork of Wikipedia, and you can do this because it's not copyrighted. You can take all of this stuff and start over, but I'm not sure how he's going to get such the big base that Wikipedia has already developed of editing users towards this new project, which places more weight on credentials and people's names with editors. So there's just information for now on the Citizendium project, but it'll be interesting to see if that gets off the ground. There's obviously some bad blood between the Wikipedia founders to the point of Jimmy Wales no longer calling Larry even one of the founders, just someone who is involved in the project. Kind of reminds me of Apple Computers, how the two Steves, one's around still, and the one necessarily that you probably would want still involved in the project, who actually created the thing, has now left. Okay, let's go on to talk about library wikis. There's a couple different sites that have been set up in the library world as wikis for conference sites, for just internal staff sites, and general community pages that people have set up. The one that I'm most familiar with is LISWiki. LISWiki.org is the first general library and information science wiki that was set up about a year and a half ago. It's open to everyone. You can go in as an unregistered user and add to it, and it contains, in theory, all information about library theory and library practices. And it's had a little bit of development so far, just kind of provocative pieces, kind of clearinghouse directories, and we'll look at some examples of that. This is, to backtrack, the first successful library wiki that was set up for the annual conference in Chicago in 2005 by the American Library Association. One of the reasons it was successful is because the ALA website was pretty sucky when it came to providing just basic information about the conference and the programs. So this became not just a good clearinghouse of information for that, but people started adding in information about restaurants and public transportation, and it really became a very useful and popular, in the blogging realm at least, community site for kind of a parallel use of the conference. Since this wiki was set up, pretty much every major national conference in the library world has had either an official or, in this case, an unofficial wiki for the conference. This is an intranet. This is the staff intranet at University of Connecticut Libraries that they've set up as a wiki. Now, I can't log in and edit that, but we can go in and look at some random pages that have guides about, presumably, just how to set up computers, how to do some basic programming for their staff end. And here's another example of a wiki. You can't really tell it except for the little disclaimer at the bottom here that says PM Wiki, but this is a library homepage and an entire library website that has been set up in a wiki format. Now, they've obviously customized it quite a bit, and they don't allow editing for just anyone. You can set up a wiki for limited editors, but it is an interesting way, and this just goes back to the bus picture, the wiki, the quick way to do things. Invariably in web publishing, you run into bottlenecks that you shouldn't have to regarding things like file and folder permissions, access rights, passwords, and whatnot. By allowing quick editing through a web browser of, I would hope, eventually everyone in the library to go in and submit changes and make them live to the library website, you've eliminated a lot of those roadblocks. And this is liswiki.org, Library and Information Science Wiki. About 1,000 articles, pretty basic definitions for the most part. As you can see, I haven't customized it too much, but it's mostly text at this point. Just a basic definition on library hand was one of the first articles. This does not obviously compete with printed library and information science encyclopedias, but it is freely available online and open to everyone to contribute if they want to add in information about what interlibrary loan is or what a dissertation is and how libraries deal with that. You can go in and do that. Some more successful pieces in LISWiki, the list of libraries providing online live reference service has become edited by many people throughout the world who have gone in and created this communal directory of all the chat sites on the web. The reason this was successful is because there's a lot of kind of one-man efforts out there, people who go in and try to maintain their list of weblogs or chat libraries or what have you. And it's really beyond the scope of one person's duties to do that. And by allowing everyone to collaborate to and contribute to a centralized list and distribute the workload for that, it's become very useful. And this is one of the largest lists on the web now, if not the largest, of libraries that are doing chat right now. So if you want to look up a directory to see who else is doing chat, who else is checking out audio ebooks, who else is, has laptop checkout, who else has a database trials evaluation form, the LISWiki site is a good place to do a little recon there to see what other libraries are doing, as well as look up basic terms and kind of contribute your knowledge about, cataloging theory, authority control, what have you. You can all kind of spill your guts there. There is a list of other library wikis in LISWiki. The main one after LISWiki is Library Success, a collection of best practices that has been set up by Meredith Farkas, the the instigator of that ALA 2005 wiki, and that's been a pretty successful site, as well as kind of other subtopics that have spun off from LIS Wiki, the conference sites I mentioned, as well as at the end of this page is a good reference list if you're interested in further reading about wikis in the library world. One more big list just to show you, we do have over 1,000 different library weblogs online right now. There's been another recent explosion of a bunch of people just being empowered by having their own voice. So there's a very exhaustive list here that far blows away the kind of one-man directories that I mentioned before out there on the web that list library weblogs. So this is a good way to just kind of ooh and ah, I guess, over how many there are. There's even subpages that were branched off that have information about academic libraries and all of the public libraries that have weblogs. Now, one interesting thing as LIS Wiki has developed to see is that that list of other library wikis is growing. So there's a big push towards specificity of different topics that are discussed and not being more general of the main library and information science wiki, just like LIS Wiki is spun off from Wikipedia itself. And this is another example that the blogging libraries wiki was set up after the weblog list in LIS Wiki was created, and in some cases I look at this and I kind of wonder what the point is to have kind of a redundant list and separate effort to maintain and the edits that go into this, because a big plus of wikis is to avoid kind of duplicative work like that. But for now, it's not something that I can comment that much more on, but it's out there and it's something that's useful to the people that look at it and maintain it. It's to their credit at this point. Now, setting up a wiki. Let me go through the steps of that. If you read through all this and you're interested in having a wiki of your own, first of all, definitely go in and contribute to established wikis. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. But if you wanted to have a wiki of your own and set one up, there's a couple different options. And these are somewhat analogous to how you would set up a weblog. You can choose to run software on your own site, or you can use a free service like Blogger. Very analogous with wikis. So you can choose, first of all, if you want to host the wiki software yourself, and you can maintain more control over how it works, or you can use a free wiki service to have it hosted elsewhere. Now, step 2 involves your web server administrator if you did want to install it on your own site. There are certain software requirements to running it, notably SQL and PHP. You can also pick what's called a flavor of the software, as open source software, MediaWiki like Linux, has a couple different branches or flavors that have a few different options in just how they operate and how they look. And it's just then running the installer. It's a pretty small package bundle, pretty useful and pretty easy to use, especially compared to other library software I've worked with. And at that point you can customize the look and feel of the Wikipedia site, if you use MediaWiki rather. And you need to set permissions. This is an important step here. You can set up, just like an intranet, to make the whole site password protected. You can also limit who can edit it, down to if you want to allow people to self-register, if you want to allow anonymous unregistered editing, and if you want to just hand out user accounts, you can do it that way. Some people have set up their personal sites as wikis, listing themselves as the sole editor. And that's a way that, you know, if they're traveling, they're on the road, what have you, they can go in and edit the pages themselves, and no one else can, but it's just an easier way for them to maintain their site. Now, parallel along the way with this, you need to have your general rules. The help pages are mostly covered by Wikipedia of how to use the syntax, so I didn't delve too much into that. But you need on your own site basic policies and a guide for what should be contributed into there. And a very important step, as with a weblog that has comments open, that if you deal with spam there, you definitely need to watch once you launch, especially if you have edit opening, open editing. There was a disastrous experiment last year that the Los Angeles Times did to open up their editorials page as a wiki. And they didn't check the settings, they allowed image uploads, and a lot of gay porn started cropping up, and they turned off the project the next day. So you don't want that to happen to you. You want to keep an eye on both growing things and what I say, trimming the weeds, eliminating the spam and just the bots that come in and muck up pages and add bad stuff. So just to review your options, this is the main flavor of software called Media Wiki. This is what runs Wikipedia, runs most of the wiki sites we've looked at, including the Star Trek Wiki and LIS Wiki and most library wikis. It's free software, so you can download it and install it on your own web server. This is the hosting option, one example of which called PB Wiki. Just think peanut butter. You can create a free wiki through this pretty quickly. There's a bunch of different extra options that you can get if you pay for a service through PB Wiki. You can get extra accounts and extra tracking that way as well. If you're interested into delving deeper into the different flavors of the wiki software, the wikimatrix.site is a good one to go into and just check off the ones you're interested in, and it will generate a pretty extensive comparison chart detailing the different features that software offers for setting it up on the administrative end and just the options that the users have. Congratulations if you've made it this far. I've rambled through a lot of points, but hopefully in general you just know more about these products than you did coming in. And hopefully I've also encouraged you to go forth and edit, to kind of share the wealth of your knowledge. And that especially holds true with the librarians who might be listening. I would eventually like it to be true that the Muppet Wiki or the video game Oblivion's Wiki is not more developed than the library wikis out there. That's kind of embarrassing to me, that more librarians aren't going in and sharing their knowledge. It is understandably scary to be kind of on the frontier of these new publication formats and understand the risks involved, that they might be wrong, just like other things might be wrong though. But hopefully you know enough about how they work now that they're not as scary, at least in terms of what they offer to users and why people use them. Now, this is ordinarily the point in a presentation where I would open it up to questions. I obviously can't do that because it's just kind of a one-sided lecture. But if you do have questions about just how things work or counterpoints to make about the things I tried to discuss, try to answer them yourself. Try to go into the Wiki help pages, read up more on the Wiki discussions to see really what's going on more at the project. I kind of skimmed through just the basic philosophical points as well as more of the nuts and bolts of how you edit a page, how you can insert mathematical formulas and things like that. So I hope to see you out there. Good luck, have fun, and thank you for watching. Goodbye.